Afternoon, Tim. How you doing?
Afternoon, Shabba. I'm very good. How are you?
I'm really well. Had a good weekend. The little one's fifth birthday party, so that came with lots of. I've eaten a lot of cake. I've eaten a lot of cake over the weekend, so I'm feeling a bit. I'm actually feeling a bit sluggish today because of the probably the amount of sugar that I've consumed over the weekend. But
Last week we were talking about greed, weren't we? And
I
making
was
really
greedy.
conscious.
I was embracing my greed. That's actually a very good way to just sort of segue into this conversation. I'm wondering, based on what we've got planned to talk about today, whether we just have a very quick recap of the sort of the problem that I brought in last week, which was around this conflict I felt around spending, especially in relation to my upcoming holiday, which is something that I'm really looking forward to, going to a place that I've never been for a wonderful experience in the Canadian Rockies, and the opportunity to also play some fantastic golf at some premium courses, which are the ones that I love. And we spoke about how that kind of just energizes me. And then there's this inner voice that always creeps up and kind of judges or reflects back saying, do you deserve, is this the right thing to do, to spend so much money when there are people in the world that are suffering, that have less than,
Mm.
etc. And I think we did a really good job of unpacking that in a way. But before we move on, would it be good just to sort of recap a couple of the themes that came out from that particular conversation?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because in a way, today's a part two or a further step. My memory, I'll say a bit and you say what you remember. You talked about privilege and you talked about your worry, how hard it was to really enjoy spending money on yourself when you're also very aware of all the people that are struggling in different parts of the world, materially and financially. And my nutshell version of that is on the psychological level that we're working with here. And I think I'm making the point that when we're working with consciousness and psychology, we're not saying you don't need political solutions. We're not saying you don't need social or economic change. And we're not saying it wouldn't be great if you, me, everyone got involved in those solutions, right? So I want to emphasize for last week, but also this week, what we're saying is if we really want political and social and economic change to happen in a good way, it's really useful to understand the psychological and consciousness dimension. So it's not either or. So that's a preamble to remind people that last week, what we did was we made you more conscious and free with your greed and your privilege. Because I think where you started was you kind of wanted to do the golf course stuff, you wanted to play, you wanted to spend money on yourself and your family, and why not? But you felt bad about it. You felt a bit guilty. And where we got to was, are you in touch consciously with the part of you or the human capacity to be greedy and have privilege and know as long as it's conscious and used in a intentional way, there's nothing wrong with that. Now that I've summarized, so if someone hasn't listened to that episode, this might already sound a bit provocative. But let me stop there and maybe you've got more to say about your experience. Because you said something like, even me saying, well, you are greedy, Shabba, but without judgment, saying that seemed to be really good for you or give you some relief or something.
I think so, because there was this tension. And I think the tension is there that you want to do something, but you aren't doing it because of some unconscious driver that's saying, I shouldn't be spending this because my money would be better off helping the poor or the underprivileged, etc. So that there is this narrative, this guilt that appears, and then you're still left with this desire to go and spend and do the activity. So you're sort of in a bind. And I think you don't end up doing either
Right.
really intentionally or with consciousness. And so you don't get to enjoy all of the goodness that the spending would bring, and nor do you really relate to the underprivileged or the less fortunate. And as we said, I think these are just unconscious patterns that play out. And I think what happened for me is when I acknowledged that greed, it suddenly became okay. And I think what it did highlight, though, was almost like an elevated level of awareness around maintaining a responsibility or balance around sort of, yes, enjoy the things that you can and that are available to you, but that doesn't mean that you have to then neglect as a result the things that you're passionate about. And maybe, being in that elevated state of enjoyment actually allows you to show up with better energy, with better resources for helping out. So, depriving isn't a means to then fulfilling something over on the other side. I think that's where I was sort of getting to. I'm still battling with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyone who hasn't heard that, I would strongly advise you to listen to the previous episode before this one, because where we're going today is into some territory that I think is really important, and it absolutely links to what we were talking about last week: privilege, greed, and it can feel quite provocative. A lot of this work, when we get into the unconscious psychology about money, is counterintuitive. So it's not provocative because I'm trying to be provocative. It's provocative because it really flips the usual way that we think about stuff. But that's because the usual way we think about money is stupid and we haven't really thought about it. And we just have a load of assumptions. So it can feel provocative. So I really would ask people listening, if we get into, take some more steps today, just to really listen with an open mind or refer back to some of the earlier episodes where we laid out this framework of ideas. Okay, so where do we want to go from here then?
So I think now sort of I'm sort of in this situation where, okay, look, there is poverty all around us. I mean,
Sure.
and there's poverty, I'm going to use some words and then we'll sort of hone in, but poverty, suffering, inequality, privilege is a word that we've used, and you can't get away from it.
No.
So it's almost like, how do you show up in the world and relate to this in a way that's almost, I feel like honoring is the word that I'm using. And that feels even a bit like, what do you mean? Like honoring the poor or honoring the underprivileged, or even just understanding this on a level which is a bit different to the usual sort of association. And I believe it sometimes goes, one of two ways. Either you sacrifice everything and you become fixed on the plight of others at the expense of then experiencing anything for yourself because of the guilt. And I think I mentioned that in the last episode about this, actually a bit of guilt is still good kind of thing. And or the other one is that you almost like out of sight, out of mind, and you don't even sort of relate to it because it's just too painful and too triggering to think of your own privilege and your own greed. So I'm looking at it from how do I now show up and relate to this poverty? Let's call it for what it is. This
Great.
This is everywhere.
Great question. I think you've named two positions that we see a lot of in society, and I'm not sure either of them are helpful. So maybe our question is, what might be a third, more integrated position? So the first position, out of sight, out of mind. I don't like to look at it. I don't like to think about it. I look the other way. I may tell myself a whole load of stories. For example, well, poor people are poor because they're lazy, they deserve it. It's not that I'm lucky or I've been born into a certain fortunate situation, but it's all my own hard work. So we're getting into political ideas. But yes, one position is to try and distance myself from the existence of poverty or suffering or inequality. I may tell myself many, many stories about why that's okay and why I deserve it. And that may psychologically allow me to just not really want to engage, right? So we see that in politics, we see that in different social groups. We'll talk about that in depth. The second position is the opposite of that. I get very, very focused on it. And as you say, I therefore might feel very angst-ridden myself, even though I'm not immediately suffering from financial poverty, but I can't enjoy anything. I don't let myself enjoy anything. I feel I must carry this guilt around. I can't enjoy a holiday. We talked last week about people who are very environmentally conscious. I can't go into a supermarket or buy anything at all without feeling really shit about it, because I'm aware the price I pay for my awareness is I'm aware that everything's connected with some problematic situation. Social inequality, environmental destruction. That doesn't seem a great way to go through life either.
And also just to add in, and that spills into your other relationships, because not only do you suffer, but it's almost like you then beat everyone else with the same
Yeah,
stick kind of thing.
yes. You make other people suffer. And psychologically, that's really interesting. That might be conscious, often it's unconscious. And what's going on there is something like this. Well, there are these other people in the world who are suffering and deprived. So my way of dealing with that or responding is I must suffer and be deprived. That's the way I show some
Hmm.
allyship. So I won't enjoy anything, even though I could, because I could afford it. I won't enjoy anything. And actually, everyone around me, I'm going to make sure they suffer and feel deprived too. And that does happen. I see people who are very politically ideological, very radical. And we talked last week about often there's an absence of joy in that position. Actually, I think both positions have an absence of joy.
I do have an example that
Yeah.
we spoke about this, but I find it very difficult to enjoy a setting where there's a lot of food on the table. And I feel myself getting very triggered when there's what I would consider an excess of dishes being served, because there are people in the world that don't have the amount of food. Now, for 1 minute, if I stop myself and now reflect on it, I don't think on that day, if we cook less dishes, that's improving the plight of the underprivileged. But I almost get so worked up about it, and it creates conflicts in my own family, because I literally just feel like I'm the person that's wanting everyone else to, right, well, there are people in the world that are, and we're being extravagant and greedy, right? So, side note, I don't necessarily want to go there, but I just like flagging up my own
Yeah.
stuff, because other people might resonate with it.
Yeah, it's very real. I'm sure a lot of people listening will have those sorts of experiences. Lots of people growing up were told by parents, you should finish what's on your plate because what about all the starving children in Africa?
Mm,
And it would have been Africa. If I'm in the UK when I was
yeah.
growing up, that's what people were talking about then. Um, yeah. So again, with that situation that you mentioned, there's maybe lots of food on the table. One way of thinking about that psychologically is there is a tension, right? You and I talked about it last week. It's hard to know what to do. There is a tension. There's a political tension between countries who have more and countries who have less. And within a country, there's tensions between different groups. And those tensions are very real. And maybe they could become creative. And they, as I say, they do need awareness and intelligence. And we need to work with those tensions. So I'm not just saying we shouldn't care. But sometimes I'm caught in that tension, and because I absolutely don't know what to do, I don't know how to live with this or face this or experience it. So what do? I just create the tension in my family. I'm actually just spreading tension. No, it's not deliberate, but it's almost like when I'm creating a situation in my own family where no one's enjoying themselves and we're all starting to argue, without realizing it, I'm sort of recreating a very real social or political tension. So, what do we do about it? The first thing I was going to say, and then I'll hand over to you, is this. The first position you mentioned, which is, well, that the poor are the poor and it's their fault, and there's nothing to do with me, or I don't even like to look at it, or everyone's fine, really, or there's some sort of denial and looking away. In that position, I don't have to even ask, what do I do about it? It's not my problem. Okay. The second position is maybe even more painful because I'm saying, well, I can't enjoy anything and I make my family feel bad and I'm going to go play golf, but I'm not going to really enjoy it. So I'm in this tension. But I think a really important question there is, does any of that actually help me take wise action or make a positive change in the world? Does the guilt and the lack of joy and all that goes with that, does that help me make a change? And I'm just asking you a response because last week you were sort of saying, well, maybe it does, but I'd ask anyone listening who recognizes they're in that position, does it actually help you take action would be my question.
I don't feel like it does. I feel like the negativity and the bad energy, if I was going to sort of label it, It hasn't moved me to becoming a better humanitarian. So I can only speak for myself and say that holding that tension and feeling that guilt and spreading tension when there's too many dishes on the table doesn't move anyone closer to taking action. I'm just trying to resolve an inner conflict, and that's it. I'm just, psychologically, I'm in a bit of a stressful state because I can't reconcile these things, but nothing's getting solved as a result of that. I'm certainly not going to get people to to join my cause or campaign, even if I did have one, by spreading that stress. So no, I don't think it does.
And sometimes there are causes or campaigns that really occupy that position, and I've worked with and been involved in them. I think I mentioned last week I have a history as an activist and in political and social change. Because what tends to happen then is I'll attract other people with the same psychology and the same unconscious mindset. And often we maybe will create an organization that looks like it's doing great things, but if we're not careful, it might be fueled by quite a lot of negativity. And that's not necessarily a bad thing for creating change, but then there's tension and conflict. And often those organizations are not as effective as they could be from I would say, a more integrated position. And just for you personally, sure, I know you, Shabba, you want to resolve a psychological tension, but if there was a way for you to reconcile this and actually make a more positive difference with the causes and the groups that you care about, I'm guessing you would like that.
It's a win-win.
Right. So if there was a way for you to have wonderful holidays with your family where you experienced connectedness and joy, this is a reference to last week, and mobilize whatever time, resource you had, but from a position of love and joy and genuine sharing rather than guilt, maybe you could do more or offer more.
And I think the issue is this tying up the money. So if the money goes here, then the money can't go there. And it's a very binary thing in my mind. And I think that creates a problem.
Yes, that's a beautiful spot. Because what you're noticing is even in this very kind of emotional, difficult landscape where we're talking about poverty, suffering, and this is going to sound really counterintuitive, we still make the same mistake that you and I have been exploring through all of our conversations. We put too much onto money and we miss all the stuff that's really important here that isn't to do with money. And I can see you smiling. For people just listening, you're smiling. So someone listening to this, especially if you haven't listened to previous episodes, you might be thinking, what are you talking about? Of course, inequality and poverty is about money. And they might either be thinking I'm insane or that I'm just some privileged, crazy person like the first position who hasn't thought about this stuff. But in our conversation so far, Shabba, with everything, what we're saying is we don't disrespect money and we're not stupid about money, but we also notice when we put unconsciously onto money a whole load of positive and negative or pleasant and unpleasant human emotion. And we tangle stuff up around money that isn't just to do with the number. So what I'm suggesting is even in these very sensitive conversations about human experience, like the experience of poverty or the experience of suffering, maybe we can separate out money from those as human experiences. And that might point us on a third position that might be more helpful.
I mean, the reason why I was smiling is because it almost just felt like the penny dropped a little for me in terms of, yeah, crikey, this binary thing is just for me because I'm spending money somewhere, and therefore I'm saying to myself, and the guilt is now I can't spend the money elsewhere to alleviate a problem that I genuinely feel is a problem. And my heart aches when I see the suffering, when I see the person homeless outside Asda. And a spending is maybe a reminder of those people that are suffering. And I almost feel like, well, I've now deprived them because my money has gone there and it could have gone somewhere else.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about what on earth do I do about the inequality in the world, the suffering, the damn unfairness of it all, the poverty, A mistake most of us make is we bundle a lot around money. Should I give money? Should I not give money? Should I spend money? Of course, it's good to give money intentionally to really good projects that help, for sure. But the two mistakes we make, which again, anyone who's listened to all our episodes so far will start to recognize this pattern. The first mistake I make is I think money is the thing that will solve these problems. Now, money helps. We're not stupid about money. We're not disrespecting money. But let's be honest. If I see a homeless person on the street and I really want to help, I might think, do I give them money or not money? But isn't that a very, very narrow range of behaviors? What else could I do if my heart was truly open, whether I had money or not at that moment? What could I do that could be helpful?
I think you could start with having a conversation with them.
Right. I could connect. And again, someone listening will say, well, that's not going to feed them, but connection helps, right? What else might I do? I'm just brainstorming. I'm not asking you personally.
Yeah, I mean, could take them for a warm meal.
Yeah.
You could actually do so many things. But I think the human connection and having someone recognize them and just even ask their name, I think is massive. And I know that there's some charities that I've been involved with where they hand out, packs to homeless and rough sleepers, and sometimes they even have a sort of like a food distribution, central London. And the thing that the guests value the most is just a hello and how are you, and getting them to sort of connect. So
Seeing someone's humanity. Now,
yeah,
again, I'm not saying that's the whole solution. I'm just taking a very first step to realize that sometimes when we don't want to acknowledge all the ways that we're choosing not to help, we put it all onto money. How about this? I could, if I was truly courageous and truly trusting and truly loving person, I could say, hey, you look like you need a bed and a shower. Well, I'm lucky. I've got a house. Come and have a shower, come and have a nice bath, and come and stay for a while. Now, most of us don't do that, and I realize there are many issues around safety and safeguarding, etc. But as a gesture in the UK, if 1 in 10 of us or 1 in 100 decided that's what we're going to do today, we've solved homelessness. Okay. Now, again, what we're doing here is we're playing between a practical level and the psychology. The reason we don't do that, and the vast majority, a few very special souls do, and they're remarkable people. But most of us don't, and we either think, I'm going to give them a fiver or I'm not, and we make it about money. And part of us focusing on money is that allows us to not see all of the other ways that we're not even thinking about really responding to this person, respecting their humanity, and helping, whether I've got cash or not. If I've got a shower and a roof over my head, I can really help this person. But I don't. I choose not to. That's okay. So what I'm suggesting as a next step is, when we look a bit closer, the reason, or one of the big reasons there are some of these problems in the world, or that we don't help more, is nothing to do with money. It's because I'm scared. I lack courage. I don't trust. I quite like my routine as it is. These are all human experiences, not really to do with money.
yeah,
Let me pause there. We've taken a step into this. What are you thinking?
that feels very weighty for me, because it makes me question a lot of stuff, even around religious teachings
Uh-huh.
and examples of uh, prophets and saints and people that we look up to and admire and are
hmm
supposed to follow in their teachings.
hmm
And we've got narrations of how they distributed their wealth,
hmm
but we also have examples of how they delivered food to
Yeah.
people, how they invited people into their home, and all sorts of sort of other examples of how they showed up for the poor, the underprivileged, the less fortunate, and they weren't scared or fearful. And actually, I'm going to bring in a narration, and this isn't a religious podcast or anything like that, but it's
Yeah.
nice when these stories, because they're universal, I believe. But the Prophet Muhammad, there is a tradition, and I'm going to paraphrase, but when when a beggar used to come into the mosque and sit down amongst people that were a bit wealthier, um, there was a particular individual that sort of moved his cloak away, like almost because a poor person came and sat next to him, and the Prophet scolded him, saying, you know, the action that you just did, do you believe that this person's poverty, you're going to catch it, you know, kind of thing. And it was almost like a polite way of reprimanding him for insulting the person that came into the mosque. And there's numerous stories around this, but that's the whole fear and the mentality of, you know, coming up against this, you know, breaking from routine and all of those things that you said. And I'm like, they're so true. You know, there is something stopping me from
Yeah.
carrying out what I
Yeah.
would consider very noble actions.
Yeah. So this is a big topic, but I think it's really important to open this up and explore that. And I like what you said. You know, this phrase, this person in the mosque might catch poverty.
Yeah.
We move our cloaks away.
Yeah.
What I'm suggesting is those of us who are lucky to have some material wealth and assets, or at least not to be really struggling, whether or not we give money and whether or not we go on nice holidays to Canadian golf courses, we need to acknowledge and see, not with judgment, but with real honesty, how we're moving our cloaks away the whole time. And when we don't move our cloaks away, there may be many things we could do with money and also without money to start to shift some of these things, and we don't. Now let's take another step, because it can get really weird now, counterintuitive. If I'm like one of these great souls that you mention in your tradition, and they're in all traditions and also in no traditions, but if I am, there maybe people listening know some remarkable people who've done that, who've just taken people in for a while, or will just sit and chat and have a cup of tea. A cup of tea costs a couple of quid, who really somehow can respond. And I know we're talking about homeless, but there may be many other ways that we can help in different situations. If a person operates with that, you mentioned this word, they're not afraid, they're trusting, they're loving, they're truly generous, they're not putting themselves above or below anyone else, they're able to see anyone with real humanity. I would say someone who could actually live like that is quite rich. Not about money, I'm not talking about their bank, but if I can go through life seeing the world this way, not judging, doing what I can, not beating myself up, all of these things, my life's quite rich. If I have a lot of money in my bank account, a big house, a lot of money, but I don't like to see situations, I wouldn't really trust myself to invite anyone in, I feel in some way fearful or limited to help my fellow person, then maybe although I'm financially rich, I'm actually quite poor in other ways, spiritually poor, or my sense of real trust in my community. So what I'm saying here is when we make it all about money, just as we narrow all the what different ways we could help without money, we also stop noticing all the ways that our lives can be poor or impoverished or not very rich, even when we've got a lot of money.
Beautiful. Yeah. Never looked at it like that.
What? So say more. What's something's beautiful or
It's
interesting about that idea? Say more.
it removes money from the equation and the focus on the number and all of the qualities that we think are associated with money. It's almost like that balloon just got popped, because it's like, well, actually, you do get to experience those qualities that I aspire to, a lot of people that I speak to aspire to. And, you know, you could have the most money in the world and yet be a pauper. That's it's quite a it's quite a weighty thing to just
Yeah.
sort of contemplate on, and quite bizarre, really.
Well, it is bizarre because we've been so trained to think about money in a certain way and to not notice these unconscious human emotions and feelings that we project or tangle up, that when we lift the lid and go deeper, it can often feel both strange and provocative, but also somehow beautiful and true, because I believe with this work we're pointing to a deeper level. Let me read a quote on this, and then I want to hopefully take one more step here. And the further step is this. If it's true, let's say in this society, there are many people with money, but who some ways are inwardly poor, impoverished. They don't feel trusting, they're not connected, they feel very fearful. There will be implications about how willing and how able they are to actually help. Because if I'm fearful and not connected and my life feels impoverished in different ways, even if I've got 10 million in the bank, I won't be able to use that money or my resource to help. It won't be able to flow. And this is maybe a deeper reason behind the financial inequality we have. So I'll repeat that in a second because that's a big idea. What I want to say again, I know I've said it at least once or twice, is none of this is saying there isn't real material and financial poverty, and that if we can get money to flow and move in more equal and healthy ways, of course, that's really good. We need to alleviate financial material poverty. So again, we're not being stupid. That's the slogan for this podcast, right? The problem of
Yeah.
money, brackets, let's not be stupid about money. So we're not denying money. We're just saying if we are going to get this to flow differently and be arranged differently, we need to go deeper. Yeah. So let me read this quote and come back to this idea of people with financial wealth who inwardly experience themselves as very poor, but that we don't like to see that, you see. This comes from one of the richest men in the world at the time it was said, Aristotle Onassis. I don't know if you know about him. He was a Greek Argentinian shipping magnate, but apparently one of the most wealthy men in the world at that time. And he says, a rich man is often only a poor man with a lot of money. A rich man is often only a poor man with a lot of money. Whoever believes that with money you can buy everything has obviously never had any. So from one of the richest men in the world is distinguishing between having a lot of money and being rich or poor.
Yeah.
It's not the same. I want to take one more step, but just let
Yeah.
me pause, see what's coming up.
Yeah,
for you.
no, that quote just feeds into sort of everything that we've been discussing. It's not in the number, and it never has been, and throws up a lot of stuff around even the words that I use, in some of my interactions with clients, like the messaging around reaching like retirement or financial independence. It's having enough so that you don't fear running out of money. Like even that wording as well is just very pervasive in terms of the fear of running out of money. How rich are you if you're constantly in fear of running out of money?
Well, that's true. And also another thing you could ask people is, what are you doing now to make sure you don't run out of friends? What are you doing now to make sure you don't run out of faith, trust, hope, enjoyment? Because arguably, if I have all of those things and more, I get to be rich with and without money. Whereas if I live my life, we talked about this when we talked about retirement and pensions. So I just want to come back to the idea of wealthy people who are rich in some ways with numbers and maybe in other aspects of their life, but poor in others. And again, I'm not being romantic. I'm not saying poor people are always happy and rich people are always unhappy. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying richness and poverty are much more complex than we think. And if I put it all onto a money number, I miss stuff every way. Okay. One of the things that we in the affluent West don't like to do is acknowledge our suffering. There's been a story maybe last 50, 70 years, a modernist story that's kind of said in the West, industrial progress, capitalism, we've sorted it and we're just more and more staff and more cleverness, and we will end human problems and end human suffering. Again, I simplify a very, very complex idea, but we still suffer. If we have money, we suffer. If we don't have money, we suffer. If we have money, we can be poor in many other ways. A lot of rich people who struggle with relationships or even their own self-esteem or enjoyment of life. And poor people suffer with that too, financially poor. But some people don't have much money, but somehow they get to live very, very rich lives, right? So it's more complex. If I make poverty just about money, as well as not seeing all the other ways I could be helpful and help change the world, I also don't have to acknowledge the ways in which I'm poor and suffering. I can look at people, maybe in my country or my city or other parts of the world, and I say, they're the poor ones. Poor them, they're suffering, and they may well be, and we should do something about it. But I can project my own vulnerability, my suffering onto them. Or not like me, because I've got a house and central heating. Poor them. And then I other the poor. Well, that's not going to help me help anybody. And I put all the suffering on them, and I don't have to see that me and my middle class friends, actually, if I'm really honest, I'm suffering. My life doesn't feel rich. I've got 2 nice cars and a 2-week holiday, but my life lacks meaning. I'm anxious. I don't feel rich.
Yeah, that is a great next extension to what we're talking about. And it comes back to I was just thinking about the abandonment of the life path, or almost like the diminishing of the life path, by, deflecting somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so and then you don't have to acknowledge that you're scared, you're fearful, you're all of those things, that you're unhappy, because actually you've again put everything onto the number and to a level of comfort and status in the world. And as long as you can sort of look at the other, it deflects away, and you can.
They're suffering. Look
Yeah,
at them. They're suffering, not
yeah,
me.
yeah. So where do we go? I'm conscious of, we're sort
Yeah.
of nearing the end of
Yeah.
this week's episode, and it feels like, okay, so what are the takeaways?
Yeah. I think maybe this one's going to be ever so slightly longer than our usual
Yeah.
podcast. I hope it's been helpful and interesting for people listening. We've taken a number of steps, and each one could require press the pause button, think about it for a while, and go further. I'd like to say one more thing, linking this psychology to practical action, and then maybe we could suggest something for people to take away. So here's the thing. We do need solutions, right? It's a scandal, frankly, that there's homelessness in the society. It's a scandal that we have the number of children in material financial poverty. It's an outrage. And again, nothing in what we're saying says we shouldn't change that. And yet, it doesn't bloody change, Shabba. Labour government, Tory government, this, that, the other, it doesn't change. That suggests to me we need to understand the deeper reasons why it doesn't change. Well, coming back to my last point, if it's true there are a lot of people with a lot of material assets who don't feel rich, they feel tight and afraid and poor as inner experiences, then those people are not going to use their money to help others. They won't be able to. Those people are not going to support legal political changes where they're taxed a bit more. They won't do that because they don't feel rich. If we can do the inner work where the people who are lucky and fortunate and maybe hardworking and clever as well have lots of material assets, if we can help them do the inner work so as well as their material wealth, they actually feel, whew, I feel good, I'm connected, my life is meaningful, I have good relationships, I feel trusting, then sure, money's going to flow and be able to help other people much more. So one of the underlying reasons there is in the world this inequality and in a society or a city is because many of the people who have a lot of wealth are secretly poor. They're inwardly, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually poor. And they don't like to admit it. They don't like to acknowledge it, and they don't know what to do about it. So they just cling on to their wealth. So this is why I think this work, or thinking about poverty and inequality through this lens, can help all of those practical policy changes actually happen and help people support them. And there are tiny little examples of this. Examples of, I think it's the daughter or the granddaughter of Walt Disney, who's one of the wealthiest women in the world. not only starting to just give lots of her own money away, but advocate for a wealth tax in America and say it's crazy that we're holding on to this money. Help us give our money away. Now she's, for whatever reason, more aware or more at ease that she can do that. So what we really need is help for very and moderately wealthy people in society to do the inner work so that their resource can flow with real goodwill and freedom.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I was just sort of grappling with is that we read about quite a lot of billionaires being so philanthropic with their foundations and
Yeah.
things like that. And I would really like to actually look a bit deeper into this work and see, well, where is this money all going, and what change is actually happening? Because I see the numbers that are quoted around, and it's, some serious amounts of money that these charitable foundations, that these very wealthy individuals, um, and the movement to actually pass on this wealth during their lifetime. And maybe there is a tide that's shifting. I don't know. It's not an area that I'm too much of an expert. So again, I don't want to judge, but I'm just thinking, well, I mean, there's definitely enough money around to solve these problems. And again, I'm sort of focusing on the money, right? So I've immediately gone there. But yeah, it needs a combination of the two, right? It needs the resources, but it also needs the mindset and the willingness to be free enough to want to create the solutions. So yeah, I'm quite interested to see whether is there something different going on in the philanthropy movement, in terms of something
Yeah.
that we're not quite seeing, and is it maybe not what quite meets the eye?
I think you're right. It's a whole other episode or even a
Yeah.
series, and we could maybe even bring in and talk to people working in
Okay.
this space. Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question. For today, I think if people were wanting to work with something from today, I'd say let's focus on that inner dimension. So I would invite anyone listening to spend the next week or two with a couple of questions and look in their own experience and look out at the world and just try and be more open minded. Don't just go with the normal story we've all been socialized to believe. And the first question is, where do I feel rich? Whether you've got money or no money, or in which areas of life do I feel a richness? You might have no money but feel rich in some areas or wherever. And where, if I'm honest, do I feel poor? Where in my experience do I feel impoverished? Maybe I have lots of money, but I really have no sense of meaning or fulfillment in my work or activities. So, where am I rich and poor? And just start to draw a map or see that's not really about a number, or the number is one small part of that. And then the other is look out into the world, just notice people in the street, or if you're watching the news or impressions that come to you, the same question: where do I see richness in the world? And where do I see poor or poverty? And you won't always know, some will be your imagination. Maybe I'll share a story very briefly as an example, because I realized this was absolute formative for me. Of course, I didn't at the time. When I was 18, I worked for 6 months and then I traveled in Northeast Africa for 6 months. I always wanted to go to Northeast Africa. And my experience then, it really touched me and kind of, well, not just touched me, it was so amazing, was seeing and being with so many people who materially had nothing like what I'd been brought up with. They were okay, but they had nothing like what I'd been brought up with in North London, but had a generosity and a hospitality and a warmth, and not just with me, with each other. And there was so much. I can't even find that. There
Yeah.
was so much that I experienced just being with those people and chatting and having tea that I had not experienced in my reasonably well off North. I just hadn't seen it. I just hadn't experienced it. And it really touched me. And again, I don't want to fall into romanticism, but there was no doubt as a lived experience that those people had a sparkle in their eye and just a sense of ease and goodness about their lives that I hadn't really seen much of in my upbringing. So I would invite people
Mm.
to reflect on their own inner wealth and poverty and what have they really seen and experienced in the world.
Yeah, That's a good example, actually, of, because I was thinking, oh, it's like the richness that you see elsewhere, but that what you described felt rich.
Well, it was a feeling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really did. That was a different episode to probably ones that we've done, but one that's, I think, going to help a lot of people start to just question a few things, and that's what we want to do, is get people to question and do some inner work, because that's where the change might happen.
Yeah.
All right, Tim.
With all episodes, and particularly this one, if people got questions, comments, things they're wrestling with, I would love to hear from people. So
Yeah, please
people can
do.
contact us via the podcast, can't they?
They can reach out to us on LinkedIn. It's probably the best place. All right, you take care, Tim. I'll see you next week.
Dear Shabbar, thank you. Bye-bye.